There is a kind of pain that doesn't scream. It just lingers. It sits in your chest after the unread message. It lives in the pause after they pull away for no clear reason. It stares back at you in the dark when you keep asking yourself the same exhausting question. If they felt something too, why did they go cold the moment it started to matter? And that is what makes avoidant attachment so devastating. Not because it is loud, but because it is quiet in all the wrong places. No slammed doors, no final speech, no clean ending. Just warmth, then distance. Depth, then detachment. Presence, then this strange emotional disappearance that leaves you talking to the memory of who they were 3 days ago. If you have ever loved someone like this, or if a part of you knows this pattern lives inside you, then you already know the silence is never just silence. It is confusion. It is fear dressed up as independence. It is longing held hostage by a nervous system that learned closeness can feel dangerous. And here is the brutal truth most people do not want to hear. The more you chase an avoidant person for reassurance, the safer they feel staying away. Not because they do not care, because pressure turns connection into threat. That is the part that breaks people. You try harder because you care more. You explain more because you want clarity. You offer softness, patience, understanding. One more conversation. One more chance. One more carefully worded message that says, I am not here to hurt you. But to an avoidant nervous system, intimacy itself can feel like the edge of a cliff. Even healthy love can activate alarm. Even tenderness can feel invasive. Even being deeply wanted can trigger the old reflex that says, run before you disappear inside someone else. So they withdraw. They numb out. They intellectualize what should be felt. They call it space. They call it being busy. They call it needing freedom. And sometimes they even believe that is all it is. But underneath that distance, something much older is happening. Their amygdala, the part of the brain that scans for danger, is not always good at telling the difference between true threat and emotional closeness. Their nervous system learned early that depending on someone can cost too much. That needing is risky. That vulnerability can become humiliation, rejection, engulfment, disappointment. So when love starts becoming real, cortisol rises, the body tightens, dopamine becomes unstable, and the very person they wanted starts to feel like the source of the overwhelm. That is why avoidant attachment is so confusing from the outside, because what looks like not caring is often overstimulation. What looks like indifference is often emotional flooding with no language attached to it. What looks like confidence can be a beautifully defended terror of being known too closely. They did not always stop caring. They often felt too much and trusted it too little. And the core concept you need to understand is this: distance is their regulation. Silence is not always a punishment. Detachment is not always the absence of feeling. For an avoidant person, pulling back is often the only way they know how to calm the storm inside them without admitting there is a storm at all. That is why the signs are so easy to misread. The first sign is that closeness feels good to them, right up until it becomes consistent. In the beginning, they can be magnetic, attentive, surprising, deep in flashes. They open windows into themselves just enough to make you feel chosen. The chemistry is real. The pull is real. Sometimes they come alive in the uncertainty, because uncertainty lets them feel desire without the full weight of dependency. But the moment the connection asks for stability, something changes. You feel it before you understand it. Their texts slow down. Their energy shifts. They suddenly seem irritated by the very intimacy they helped create. What once felt effortless now feels like you are reaching towards someone standing behind glass. Because desire is safer than reliance. Wanting is safer than staying. The second sign is that they struggle when emotions become too direct. If you say, "I miss you," they may answer with humor. If you ask, "What are we doing?" they may become vague, analytical, distracted, or tired. If you cry, they may freeze. Not always because they are cruel, but because another person's emotional intensity can activate helplessness in them, and helplessness feels intolerable. So they shift away from the raw human moment. They move into logic, timing, technicalities, practical excuses, anything but the vulnerable center. You come to them with a heart, and they answer with a strategy. The third sign is that they need disproportionate space after intimacy. Not normal space, not healthy breathing room, a dramatic internal retreat after deep connection. Maybe you had an incredible night together. Maybe they opened up more than usual. Maybe they looked at you in that rare, unguarded way that made you feel like the walls were finally down. And then, the next day, they are gone emotionally. Short replies, delayed contact, a strange coolness that feels almost surgical. This is one of the most painful patterns because it makes you think you imagined the closeness. But often, that retreat happens precisely because the closeness was real. They felt exposed. Their nervous system registered too much intimacy too quickly, so distance becomes anesthesia. The fourth sign is that they romanticize independence to avoid confronting fear. They may speak about not needing anyone, about how relationships become draining, about how people are too demanding, too emotional, too much work. They may take pride in being hard to reach, hard to read, hard to keep. They turn self-protection into identity. And from the outside, it can look powerful. But be careful. Sometimes what is marketed as strength is just a wound that learned how to speak confidently. True independence does not fear connection. It does not panic when someone gets close. It does not feel trapped by care. Avoidant independence often carries a hidden message. If I never fully lean on you, you can never fully destroy me. The fifth sign is subtle, but once you see it, you cannot unsee it. They tend to minimize what matters. They downplay moments that were obviously meaningful. They act casual after intense intimacy. They pretend they are unaffected by things that clearly moved them. They might say, "It's not that deep," when it was. They might disappear after a vulnerable conversation, then return acting as if nothing happened. This minimization is not random. It is emotional damage control. If something means less, it can hurt less. If a bond is named too clearly, it becomes harder to escape. If they admit they care, then they have to face the terrifying possibility of loss. So they shrink the moment before the moment can expose them. The sixth sign is that they are drawn to connection, but uncomfortable being needed. This is where the paradox sharpens. They may enjoy your warmth, your softness, your loyalty, your emotional availability. They may come to you when the world feels heavy. They may let you soothe what they refuse to name. But if your needs rise too visibly, if your attachment becomes undeniable,
If your desire for reciprocity becomes clear, they can start to feel cornered.
They like closeness when it comes without demand. They like love when it asks them for nothing. But love that asks for presence, consistency, emotional labor, accountability, that can feel like a threat to the self they built around control. And then the story in their mind changes. Suddenly, you are too much, too attached, too sensitive, too available. Not because you changed, because your love started costing them their defenses. The seventh sign is that they often confuse numbness with peace. An avoidant person can be deeply disconnected from their own emotional signals, not because they are shallow, because feeling had to be shut down long ago to survive something they could not process at the time. So now, what feels familiar is not warmth, it is distance, it is control. It is that cold, internal quiet that arrives when nobody is too close, nobody expects too much, and nothing threatens the illusion of self-sufficiency. This is why they may leave relationships that actually mattered and feel relief before they feel grief. The nervous system calms first, the heart speaks later. And later is where it gets interesting. Because what they avoid in closeness often returns in absence. The eighth sign is the one most people wait too long to understand. They often feel your loss most intensely when you stop reaching. Not always immediately, not theatrically, not in the dramatic way anxious people do, but slowly, privately, under the surface, in the spaces where distraction no longer works. When you stop chasing, the nervous system no longer has to defend against pressure. The threat signal drops. The quiet returns. And in that quiet, what they buried can begin to rise. Your laugh in the kitchen, your hand on their back, the way you looked at them without trying to own them, the message they never answered, the version of themselves they almost became with you. This is when the flip happens. Not because you played a game, not because you manipulated the silence, but because your absence removes the very friction they were reacting against. And once the pressure is gone, longing can finally be felt. This is why avoidant people often seem more emotional after the connection is damaged than while it is alive. While you were there, they were regulating against intimacy. Once you leave, they are left alone with the emotional residue they never metabolized. And yes, sometimes they come back. Sometimes they reappear with softness they could not access before. Sometimes they watch from a distance. Sometimes they send the small message that means more than it says. Sometimes they suddenly become curious, attentive, even possessive when they feel you slipping into a life that no longer revolves around them. Because now it is not intimacy they are facing. It is loss. And loss is a different language. But this is where you need to be careful, because understanding their psychology can become a trap if you use it to abandon yourself. You can know exactly why they pulled away, and still be deeply harmed by it. You can have compassion for their nervous system, and still decide it is not safe for your heart. You can see the child inside their distance, and still refuse to be punished by the adult choices they make. This is the warning. Do not turn your empathy into self-betrayal. A lot of people hear all of this and think the answer is to become colder, harder, more unavailable, more mysterious. They think if distance affects the avoidant, then detachment must be the key. No. Weaponized silence is still a trauma pattern. Performing indifference is not power. Starving yourself of your own tenderness just to trigger someone else's pursuit is not healing. It is just the same wound wearing better clothes. The real shift is not becoming avoidant to win the avoidant. It is becoming so rooted in your own worth that you stop auditioning for someone's emotional availability. That is what changes the dynamic. When you stop over-explaining your value, when you stop translating your needs into apologies, when you stop chasing clarity from people committed to confusion, when your nervous system no longer mistakes inconsistency for chemistry, when you no longer beg to be handled gently by people who keep reaching for you with shaking hands. That is when the energy changes. Because the avoidant person is often used to one thing above all else: people abandoning themselves in order to stay connected to them. People waiting. People excusing. People shrinking. People accepting crumbs and calling it patience. People turning pain into devotion. And when you stop doing that, your presence changes shape in their mind. Now you are not the constant reassurance they can take for granted. You are not the emotional supply that remains available no matter how absent they become. You are not the safe place they can visit without accountability. Now you are someone they can actually lose. That realization can shake them, sometimes deeply. But let this land carefully. The goal is not to make them obsess. The goal is to stop obsessing over someone who keeps treating your heart like a place they can enter and exit without consequence. Read that again in your bones. Because your life changes the moment you stop asking, how do I make them feel what I feel? And start asking, why have I been willing to feel this much for someone who keeps rationing their presence? That question is holy. That question begins the return to yourself. And when you return to yourself, everything sharpens. You stop calling scraps potential. You stop romanticizing emotional unavailability as depth. You stop confusing intensity with intimacy. You stop reading mixed signals as hidden love stories waiting for the right ending. You see what is. A person who may care, but cannot currently hold closeness without retreat. A person who may feel deeply, but has built an identity around not needing. A person whose silence may be full of conflict, memory, fear, even longing. And still, not your job to decode forever. Not your job to earn what should be given freely. Not your job to bleed proof of your patience until they finally trust love. Not your job to become smaller so someone else feels safer being half present. Your power was never in forcing them to stay. Your power is in no longer collapsing when they leave. That is the identity shift. You are not the one waiting by the emotional door, hoping today they will be brave enough to open it. You are not the unpaid therapist of someone who only wants your warmth when it costs them nothing. You are not a placeholder for a future version of them that may never arrive. You are the ending of the pattern. You are the moment the body learns that love should not feel like chasing smoke through a locked house. You are the interruption, the boundary, the awakening, the one who finally understands that being deeply loving does not require being endlessly available to pain. And if they do come back, let them meet someone new. Not colder, not bitter, not hungry. Just clear. Clear enough to recognize the difference between remorse and readiness. Clear enough to see that missing you is not the same as being able to love you well. Clear enough to understand that chemistry without emotional safety is still chaos. clear enough to know that your softness is precious, and anything precious must be protected. Because in the end, the deepest revenge on confusion is not control. It is self-possession. It is becoming so anchored in your own worth that somebody else's fear of intimacy no longer decides your value. It is walking away from the emotional maze, not because you stopped caring, but because you started caring for yourself more. And that is when the silence changes. It no longer sounds like rejection. It sounds like information. It no longer feels like a verdict on your worth. It feels like truth revealing itself. It no longer pulls you into panic. It releases you into power. Let them misunderstand your distance if they must. Let them feel your absence if they only ever understood your presence when it was leaving. Let them sit with the echo of what they could not hold. You do not need to become unforgettable. You already are. The real transformation is that now, finally, you remember yourself.